You never imagine the day when your own son-in-law treats your home like a playground. You never think the walls you built with your sweat will echo with the laughter of strangers who don't respect you. But that's exactly what happened to me. My name is Stephen, and this is the story of how I turned betrayal into a lesson my son-in-law will never forget. Welcome to Revenge Depth, the place where the deepest wounds, the cruelest betrayals, and the hardest truths are told. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because here we don't just tell stories, we expose the cost of betrayal. And before we dive in, let me ask you one thing. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love to see where this community is joining from. Now back to my story. And I wasn't born rich. Everything I have today came from decades of sweat, sacrifice, and relentless work. I worked in construction for over 35 years, saving every dime I could. While other men spent their money chasing temporary thrills, I poured mine into building something that would last. That something was my villa. A 3-story house with tall gates, wide balconies, and a garden where I planted roses in honor of my late mother. For me, this villa wasn't just a house. It was a symbol, proof that every backbreaking hour, every sleepless night, and every sacrifice had meaning. When my daughter Emily got married 2 years ago, I welcomed her husband Daniel into our family with open arms. At first, he seemed polite, respectful, and eager to fit in. He complimented the house, often telling me how incredible it must feel to own something like this. I brushed it off as admiration, but over time, his compliments turned into something else, envy. He didn't just admire the villa, he wanted it. I began noticing small things. The way his eyes lingered on the property papers I kept in my study. The way he suggested, half joking, that one day this place will be ours anyway. The smirk that followed those words didn't feel like a joke. Still, I tried to ignore it. Emily loved him, and I didn't want to stir conflict in her marriage. But Daniel's arrogance grew bolder with time. The breaking point came one weekend. My wife and I had to leave town for a 2-day business conference. We locked up the villa, gave the keys to no one, and drove off without worry. After all, who would dare violate the sanctity of a man's home? The next afternoon, my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Mr. Collins, a man I'd known for 20 years. His voice carried hesitation, but also urgency. "Richard," he said, "I don't want to alarm you, but your son-in-law is in your villa, and he's not alone." My grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean he's in my villa?" "He pulled up with 3 of his friends," Collins explained. "Cars parked outside, loud music inside. They've been drinking, laughing, making a mess. Richard, it's like they're throwing a party in your house." I didn't even respond. My vision blurred with rage. My villa, my pride, my legacy, reduced to a party ground for freeloaders. I didn't tell my wife immediately. I didn't want to ruin her conference or drag her into my storm of anger. But inside, something snapped. This wasn't just disrespect, it was violation. Daniel thought he could treat my house as his own, simply because he married my daughter. He thought my silence meant weakness. He mistook patience for surrender. That was his greatest mistake. That night in the hotel, while my wife slept peacefully beside me, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying the image of Daniel and his friends laughing inside my villa, feet on my furniture, hands on my things. But I wasn't broken. I wasn't helpless. I was planning, because when betrayal comes from family, the lesson must be unforgettable, and I was going to teach Daniel a lesson that would burn into his memory forever. When I returned from the conference 2 days later, my stomach was in knots. I didn't even greet my wife properly before stepping out of the car. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something off. A crushed beer can in the corner. Cigarette butts near the garden I had so carefully maintained. My heart sank. My villa had always been pristine. I was meticulous about it. Seeing it treated like a trash bin felt like a direct slap to the face. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Stale alcohol mixed with cheap cologne. My polished wooden floors bore scuff marks from shoes that didn't belong. A chair was tilted awkwardly. The rug in the living room folded over as if someone had tripped on it. It wasn't just a party, it was an invasion. My wife noticed too. "Richard," she whispered, her eyes darting across the room. "What happened here?" I clenched my jaw and said nothing. I already knew the answer. Later that evening, I called my neighbor, Mr. Collins. He didn't hold back. They came on both nights, he told me. Music so loud my wife couldn't sleep. Cars lined up outside. Daniel acted like he owned the place. He even bragged to his friends, said one day this villa would be his, no matter what. That was it. That was the final nail. For years, I had worked to build this life. Every brick, every window, every rose in the garden had been placed with care. And here was my son-in-law, a man who had never lifted a finger to earn anything, boasting that he would take it all. I sat in silence, listening to Collins describe the chaos, while inside something cold and sharp formed. Daniel thought he was clever. He thought no one was watching. But I had evidence, a witness, a neighbor who had seen everything, and soon I would gather more. The next morning I drove straight to my lawyer's office. He was an old friend, a man I trusted with my life. I laid everything on the table: Daniel's arrogance, the unauthorized entry, the misuse of my property. My lawyer leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. "Richard," he said carefully, "if he's entering without your permission, that's trespassing. If he's damaging property, that's destruction. But if he's talking about taking this villa, then you need to think bigger. You need to protect your assets before he finds a way to manipulate your daughter into giving him leverage." Those words struck me like a warning bell. Emily loved Daniel. I couldn't let her blind loyalty put everything I built at risk. That evening, I began checking my accounts, my documents, my will. And what I found chilled me. Small attempts Daniel had already made to gain access. Subtle suggestions to Emily about transferring property, joint accounts, and even casual remarks about when the villa becomes ours. He wasn't just reckless. He was planning. I knew then that I couldn't confront him with words alone. Words wouldn't change Daniel. He'd laugh it off, deny everything, and twist Emily against me. No, I needed action. A strategy. So I did what Daniel would never expect. I played the silent game. When he and Emily came over for dinner the next weekend, I acted normal. I poured wine, cracked jokes, asked Daniel about his job. He relaxed, thinking I was none the wiser. But while he laughed across the table, I noticed his eyes drifting again to the walls, the chandeliers, the paintings, every inch of my villa. His greed was written all over his face. After dinner, when Emily went to the kitchen, Daniel leaned toward me with a smirk. "You know, Richard," he said, swirling his glass, "a place this big is too much for just two people. Someday, it should belong to someone who can really make use of it." I stared at him, keeping my expression calm, though fire roared inside me. "And who would that be, Daniel?" He smiled almost proudly. "Well, me, of course." I didn't reply. I simply nodded, as if amused by his arrogance. But inside, I had already decided this was no longer about patience. This was war. That night, after they left, I sat in my study and mapped out the plan. Step 1, secure my assets. Step 2, collect undeniable proof of his trespassing. Step 3, teach him the kind of lesson he would never recover from. Daniel thought he was playing a clever game. But he had underestimated one thing. I had built my life brick by brick, and I knew how to protect it, and soon he would learn what happens when a man mistakes kindness for weakness. The days that followed were heavy with silence. I walked through my own villa, but it no longer felt like mine. Every corner whispered of disrespect, of an intrusion that I could not ignore. The laughter of my son-in-law and his friends still echoed in my head, like an insult carved into the walls. I kept asking myself the same question. How could he think he had the right? A guess can be forgiven. A mistake can be overlooked. But this was neither. This was arrogance. This was a man walking into a home built by my sweat, dragging his companions behind him, as if my presence no longer mattered. I decided then I would not confront him with anger alone. Anger is loud, but it fades. What I needed was respect, and respect is earned through lessons that cannot be forgotten. The first step was observation. I began to notice his patterns. He liked to appear strong in front of others, showing off, pretending to be a man of power. Yet when he was alone, when the crowd was gone, I saw the cracks. He avoided my gaze, avoided real conversation, as if he knew deep down he had crossed a line. One evening I sat on the balcony, the night air pressing against my skin. My daughter came to sit beside me. She didn't say much, just asked if I was tired, if I needed tea, but I could feel the distance. Her loyalty was being tested too. Was she with me, the father who had given her everything, or with the man who thought he could own what was not his? That question haunted me more than anything. Inside me a storm brewed, but outside I remained calm, because patience is a weapon. The son-in-law thought I would burst in anger, that I would shout, fight, maybe even throw him out. But no, I would wait. And when the moment came, he would learn that a house is not made of stone and wood. It is made of respect. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. A week later he returned, this time with fewer friends, but with the same arrogance. They laughed as they entered, shoes dragging dust across the floors that I had polished with care. My daughter looked uneasy, but she said nothing. Perhaps she thought I would tolerate it again. I did not. I welcomed them with a smile, but my silence carried weight. I offered them tea, watched them sprawl across the furniture, speaking loudly as though they were kings in a palace. My son-in-law smirked at me, confident that I had surrendered. He was wrong, because while he laughed, I had already prepared my move. I had spoken to a few old friends, men who respected me, men who had seen me stand firm when times were hard. They agreed to visit that evening unannounced. And so they came, one by one, their presence filling the villa like a quiet storm. They didn't need to speak much. Their eyes alone reminded everyone who truly belonged here. The laughter of my son-in-law's friends began to fade. The smirk on his face weakened. He shifted in his seat, suddenly smaller, suddenly uncertain. My friends did not threaten, they did not shout. They simply stood there, strong and silent, and in that silence the air grew heavy. Finally I spoke. My voice was calm but sharp enough to cut the room in half. This villa is not a playground. It is not a hall for uninvited gatherings. It is the heart of my family, and those who cannot respect it have no place within its walls. The words landed like stones. No shouting, no insults, just truth. My daughter's eyes filled with tears. My son-in-law looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his expression. The lesson had begun. That night they left quietly. The silence was louder than all their laughter combined. And as the door closed behind them, I knew this was only the beginning. A man who disrespects once will try again. But next time, he would face not just silence and stares, he would face consequences, because a father can forgive many things. But disrespect inside his own home is never one of them. The villa was quiet again, but peace never lasts when pride is wounded. I knew my son-in-law. He was not the type to accept embarrassment. In his mind, my silence had been weakness, and the presence of my friends had been an ambush. He would not let it go. Men like him never do. For a few days things were calm. He kept his distance, perhaps licking his wounds, perhaps trying to figure out his next move. My daughter avoided eye contact with me, torn between loyalty and marriage. I didn't blame her. It's difficult when the man you promised your life to is at war with the man who gave you life, but tension has a way of crawling back into the open. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting in the lounge with a book when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find him standing there, not with friends this time, but alone. He wore that same forced smile, the kind people use when they want to hide the storm inside. "May I come in?" he asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed him. I stepped aside. Hospitality is in my blood. I would not shut the door on my daughter's husband. But as he walked in, I could feel his arrogance pressing against the walls. We sat across from each other. For a few moments there was only silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Then he leaned forward. "You embarrassed me," he said quietly but firmly. "In front of my friends. You made me look small." I didn't flinch. "No," I replied. "Your actions did that. I only showed you the mirror." His jaw tightened. He was not used to such directness. He tried to recover, his smile returning. "You have to understand. I'm family now. This villa, it will be mine and your daughter's one day. Why not accept that now? Why hold on so tightly?" The words cut deep, but I refused to show it. This villa was not just stone and brick. It was history, sacrifice, blood, and memory. To hear him claim it as if it were already his was an insult too heavy to bear. I leaned back, my tone steady. "Respect must be earned, not claimed. A house becomes yours when you build it, when you protect it, when you honor it. Until then, it is only walls you sit inside." His face darkened. "You think you can control everything. But times change. I have influence, I have people. You won't always be in charge." I smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But as long as I draw breath, this house will not be ruled by arrogance." The tension in the room could have snapped glass. He stood abruptly, muttered something under his breath, and left. The door shut hard behind him. That night I could not sleep. I stared at the ceiling, wondering what would come next. I knew he would not let the matter rest. He wanted power, ownership, control. And men like him always escalate. Sure enough, just a week later, he tried again. This time not through confrontation, but through manipulation. My daughter approached me with hesitation. "Dad," she began softly, "maybe you could ease up on him. He's just trying to feel respected. Maybe let him host some gatherings here. It would mean a lot." Her voice cracked slightly, as though even she didn't believe the words. I looked into her eyes and my heart ached. She was caught between us, being used as a pawn in his game. I spoke gently but firmly. "My child, respect is not a toy to be handed out. If he wants it, he must earn it. I will not hand over this house, nor allow it to be dishonored. Not for him, not for anyone." Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, but I knew she was torn. The battle was no longer just between me and him. It was creeping into her heart too. And that was the most painful wound of all. As I sat alone later that evening, I realized this conflict was no longer about just a villa. It was about values, dignity, and the legacy of a father. My son-in-law thought he was clever, but he underestimated one thing. A man who has sacrificed everything for his family will never let it be stolen by pride. The lesson wasn't over. He had been warned. Now I would show him that arrogance, no matter how loud, always falls silent in the face of truth. I stood there in silence, my arms crossed, observing everything carefully. The group of friends seemed to believe that their casual presence in my villa was acceptable, as though boundaries did not exist. But deep inside, I knew this was not just about an uninvited gathering. It was a test of respect, a lesson that had to be taught. They had made themselves comfortable, laughing loudly, spreading across the furniture, and treating the place like their own. It wasn't anger that I felt, it was disappointment. This home wasn't just walls and ceilings. It represented years of discipline, values, and traditions. To treat it so carelessly was, in my eyes, unacceptable. I waited, giving them enough time to reveal their true attitude. Slowly I noticed the details. Empty glasses placed carelessly on expensive tables, jackets tossed over the backs of chairs, and voices that carried the arrogance of entitlement. It wasn't the noise that bothered me. It was the disregard. When the moment was right, I stepped forward with a calm but firm tone. "Tell me," I asked, "do you believe this is your home?" The laughter slowly died down. Their eyes shifted toward me, unsure whether to answer or stay quiet. It wasn't the words that struck them, but the seriousness in my voice. I wasn't shouting, nor was I dramatic, but my presence demanded attention. I continued, walking slowly around the room. This villa is not just a property. It's a place of respect. Every guest who walks in is expected to honor it, not claim it. You see, hospitality has its limits. When respect is lost, the door quietly begins to close. One of them shifted uneasily in his seat. Another cleared his throat as if searching for an excuse. But I didn't need explanations. I wanted understanding. So instead of confronting them aggressively, I chose a different path. I taught them through action. I walked over to the dining table where snacks and drinks had been placed. Without raising my voice, I started collecting the glasses and plates, one by one, and setting them aside neatly. My movements were deliberate, each action communicating a silent message. The laughter had vanished completely now, replaced by a heavy silence. Then I said calmly, "When you are in someone else's home, you are under their roof, their values, and their rules. It doesn't matter who you are outside these walls. Inside here, respect must come first." The atmosphere shifted immediately. What was once casual arrogance turned into quiet reflection. Some lowered their gaze. Others looked toward the door as though realizing they had overstayed. And in that silence, I asked a simple question, one that pierced through their pride. "If this were your home, would you allow the same?" No one answered. They didn't need to. Their silence was the answer. I didn't ask them to leave immediately. Instead, I gave them the dignity of choice. "You can stay," I said, "but only as true guests, not as intruders." There was hesitation, but gradually they began to rise from their seats. One by one, they straightened their jackets, avoided my eyes, and made their way toward the door. The arrogance had disappeared, replaced with quiet respect, or perhaps guilt. As the door closed behind them, I stood there alone, reflecting. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't thrown anyone out. But the message was delivered in a way that words alone could never achieve. Respect is not demanded. It is commanded through presence, through actions, through boundaries that are clear and unshakable. That night, I realized something deeper. Lessons are not always taught in heated arguments or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons are taught in silence, in calm authority, in showing people the mirror of their own behavior. And I knew that what had just happened would not be forgotten. They might not speak of it openly, but the experience would stay with them, shaping the way they walked into someone else's home in the future. Because respect, once learned, is never easily unlearned. The silence that followed their departure lingered in the villa long after the door closed. I could still hear faint echoes of their laughter, but it was drowned out by the weight of the lesson that had been given. I poured myself a glass of water, sat in the quiet living room, and thought about what had just taken place. It wasn't just about uninvited guests. It was about boundaries. When people forget the value of respect, they begin to take liberties that don't belong to them. And in that moment, it becomes the responsibility of the homeowner, the elder, the one with authority to restore balance. But the story didn't end there. Later that evening, as I prepared to retire for the night, there was a soft knock at the door. For a moment I hesitated. Who could it be at this hour? I walked across the hall and opened the door to find one of the friends standing alone. His expression was different this time. Gone was the arrogance and laughter. Instead, there was hesitation in his eyes, almost as if he was carrying the weight of guilt. "Sir," he said quietly, "may I have a word?" I studied his face carefully. He wasn't here to make excuses, I could tell. He was here to face the truth of his own actions. I stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. He walked in slowly, his shoulders slouched. "I just wanted to apologize," he began. "Earlier today we crossed a line. We didn't mean to offend you, but I can see now how wrong it was. I kept thinking about your words, about how we wouldn't allow the same in our own homes. You were right." I listened without interrupting, letting him unburden himself. Apologies, when sincere, don't need to be dressed in long explanations. They simply need to come from the heart. And I could sense his was genuine. I nodded. "It takes courage to admit when you are wrong," I told him. "And courage is a quality far greater than pride. You've taken the first step toward becoming a better man." His shoulders seemed to relax, as though a heavy weight had been lifted. For the first time, his voice carried humility instead of arrogance. "I've never really thought about respect in that way," he admitted. "We're so used to treating everything casually. Someone's home, someone's effort, someone's values. But today I understood it. The way you handled us. You didn't shout, you didn't humiliate. You just showed us, and that hit harder than anything else could have." I allowed a small smile to appear. Lessons taught with calmness last longer than those taught in anger. Remember this, not every door that opens for you is yours to claim. Some doors are opened as a courtesy, as a gift. Never take that gift for granted." He lowered his gaze, then looked up with determination. "I promise you, sir, it won't happen again. Not with me, not with my friends. I'll make sure of it." At that moment I saw a spark in him that I hadn't seen earlier. Perhaps the incident had planted a seed, one that might grow into wisdom. And sometimes that's all that's needed, a single seed of understanding. Before he left, I asked him one final question. "Tell me," I said, "what made you return tonight?" He paused, then replied, "Because I realized respect is not just for elders or for houses, it's for ourselves too. If we don't respect others, we slowly lose respect for who we are." And I didn't want to live with that. His answer was simple yet powerful. I let him go with a nod, knowing the lesson had taken root. When the door closed behind him, I reflected once again. Not everyone in that group would come back to apologize. Not everyone would understand. But if even one person learned the value of respect, then the effort was not wasted. Because respect, once understood by one, has a way of spreading quietly, influencing others without them even realizing it. And in that moment, I felt a sense of peace. Sometimes you don't need to win every battle. You just need to plant the lesson in the right heart. The night grew quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy silence. It was the silence of understanding, of growth, of a bridge built where once there had been a wall. The following weekend, the villa was unusually quiet. The air was crisp, the skies clear, and I found myself sitting on the terrace with a cup of tea, watching the street outside. For days, I had replayed the incident in my mind. How uninvited laughter had filled my home, how pride had met its boundary, and how one young man had returned with humility. But peace, it seemed, was only temporary. Late that afternoon, the sound of an engine roared outside. I looked down to see the same son-in-law's car pull up, this time with all his friends again. My heart sank for a moment. Had they learned nothing? Or was this another test? They climbed out, not laughing this time, not shouting. Instead, they looked tense, almost uncertain. They walked to the gate, and I could see hesitation in their steps. My instinct told me they weren't here for confrontation. When I opened the door, the son-in-law stood at the front. His face carried no arrogance now. There was only unease. Behind him, his friends shifted uncomfortably, as though each one was struggling to find the right words. "We came to speak with you," the son-in-law said. His tone was calm, far different from before. "I know you may not want us here, but please hear us out." I crossed my arms, waiting. This was their moment. One of his friends spoke first, the same young man who had returned to apologize earlier. "They all know what I told you, sir, about the respect we forgot. I couldn't let it stop there. I told them everything, and they didn't believe me at first. But then they thought about it, and here we are." Another friend stepped forward. His voice was shaky but sincere. "We realized how much we embarrassed ourselves that day. At the time, we thought it was fun, like we owned the place. But now we know it wasn't fun at all. It was foolish. And it wasn't fair to you." The son-in-law finally spoke again. "I thought I was being clever, showing off. I thought bringing my friends here would make me look strong, important. But it only made me look small. And I see that now." There was a heavy silence between us. Their words carried regret, but regret alone is not enough. It must be paired with action. So I asked them, "If you truly understand, then tell me this. What does respect mean to you?" For a while, no one answered. They looked at each other, searching for words. Then one of them, the quietest of the group, spoke up. "Respect means knowing when something doesn't belong to you and not taking it. Respect means valuing someone else's space, their effort, their peace. Respect means not waiting to lose something before you appreciate it." The others nodded slowly. It was not a perfect definition, but it was an honest one. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Then come in," I said. "Not as intruders this time, but as guests." They exchanged glances, surprised. Carefully they entered, their steps measured, their voices low. The atmosphere was different now. Gone was the noise and arrogance. Instead, there was humility, even reverence, in the way they moved. I led them into the living room and asked them to sit. For a few minutes, no one spoke. It was as though they were waiting for me to break the silence. Finally, I said, "Respect is not a word to be spoken. It's a behavior to be lived. If today is the first step for you all, then let it not be the last. I'm not here to hold grudges. I'm here to teach you what you should already know. The son-in-law lowered his head. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said quietly, but I hope to earn it. One by one, his friends echoed his words. They weren't perfect, but sincerity was clear in their tone. Before they left, I told them something they would never forget. Strength is not in barging into someone else's villa with laughter and noise. Strength is in walking into any home, any place, and being welcomed, not because of fear, but because of respect. As they walked out, I felt something shift. Perhaps this time, the lesson had truly been absorbed. And if not, life itself would be their teacher. That night, as I sat again on the terrace with another cup of tea, I realized something important. Sometimes the greatest victories are not the ones you win for yourself, but the ones you leave behind in others. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every sound sharper. I sat alone in the villa, the very place they once believed they had already claimed for themselves. The walls held memories, laughter, dinners, arguments, tears, but tonight they felt like witnesses to what was about to unfold. I had prepared everything. Weeks of sleepless nights, endless patience, and careful planning had brought me here. Every document was secured. Every lock had been changed. Every corner of the house that once felt vulnerable was now mine again, fortified not by bricks or nails, but by resolve. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. They thought betrayal could go unnoticed. They thought lies could last forever. But truth has a way of breaking through the deepest cracks. It was close to midnight when I finally heard the sound. The tires crunching against the gravel driveway. Doors slamming, laughter spilling out into the night. They were confident, arrogant even, the kind of people who believed the world owed them its doors open and its lights on. I didn't move. I stayed where I was, seated in the living room, the glow of the fire casting long shadows across the walls. My heart didn't race anymore. It was steady, calm. I had already won. Then came the first sound, a hand pressing against the front door, a confused pause, a louder push, and then a frustrated knock. What the hell is going on? One voice demanded, "Why isn't it opening?" Another asked, disbelief creeping in, more knocking. Then a silence. And then the moment I had waited for, the crinkle of paper being pulled from the doorframe. My note, I could almost see their faces as they read it. The arrogance fading, the denial cracking, the disbelief pouring out in gasps. "This can't be real." One whispered, "No, he wouldn't dare, he couldn't." Another muttered, but their voice lacked conviction. And then came the shouting, anger wild and desperate. "He tricked us. How could he do this? This was supposed to be ours." Their voices carried into the night, but inside I remained still. I didn't need to stand in front of them. I didn't need to scream, argue, or defend myself. My silence was louder than their rage. My truth, secured in documents and deeds, was stronger than their betrayal. The sound of fists pounding on the door filled the air. Then came the threats. "We'll fight this. We'll take it back. You can't keep us out." But deep down they knew it was over. I rose slowly, walking to the window, just enough to catch their silhouettes under the porch light. Their posture had changed. The confidence was gone. The laughter they once wore like armor had vanished. All that remained was panic, the kind that eats through pride like rust on steel. I thought of everything that led here. The whispers behind closed doors. The forged documents. The lies spoken so smoothly they almost sounded like truths. I had carried that pain quietly, like a stone in my chest. But tonight that stone was gone. Tonight they were the ones suffocating under the weight of their choices. One of them screamed, the sound echoing through the night, sharp and raw. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something deeper. Loss, realization, the undeniable truth that their plan had collapsed, and there was no saving it. I turned from the window, letting the curtain fall back into place. I didn't need to see more. Their downfall was complete. Inside, the fire burned steadily, warm against the cold outside. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Not because the betrayal hurt any less, betrayal always leaves scars, but because justice had found its way through. I whispered softly to myself, almost like a prayer. Respect is earned, trust is sacred, and family is not an excuse for cruelty. The villa, once filled with shadows of betrayal, now belonged to me again, in every sense. And as their screams faded into the night, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This story was no longer theirs. It was mine, and I had claimed the ending. Friends, this was my story, a painful reminder that betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from within. If you connected with this journey, don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Depth, give this video a like, and share your thoughts below. Until the next story, stay strong, stay wise, and never let betrayal define you.